This is our driving green mascot. Kyle, if you want to take a picture, make sure everyone knows who is our mascot. This little one. Hello. You know what she's really thinking?
Supply chain shortages.
Okay, that's not what she's really thinking. She's really thinking...
So LiDAR is just active photon generation in the visual spectrum. You want to use a wavelength that is occlusion penetrating like radar.
Yeah, I guess a good place to get started is just to learn a little bit more about you and your background over here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's see. Sven Beiker, automotive engineer out of Germany. I actually wanted to get into cars and become an automotive engineer when I was about 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
Because somehow I was fascinated by what an automobile is or can be, that it actually gets people to places. And the idea of a road trip, I still today have very fond memories of our family vacation, getting in a car in northern Germany and drive all the way to Spain. And automobile enables you to do all of it. And the technical aspects behind it found my interest. And so I studied mechanical engineering with specialization in automotive design, automotive systems engineering, which got me to BMW to do my PhD work at BMW in what was called back then vehicle dynamics control systems, which since then has, I think, evolved quite a bit into driver assistance, and probably today would have been closely related to autonomous driving. And then I started my full-time career at BMW in the mid to late 1990s, which eventually got me to Silicon Valley in the early 2000s. Because like every other car company, basically BMW has a Silicon Valley office. Back then, it was a lot about trend scouting and innovation research. And was supposed to be for 3 years. And well, it's been 18 years ago. And well, interestingly enough, in the early 2000s, I was thinking, well, what would I do as an automotive engineer in Silicon Valley? But if nothing else, I'm going to have a good time, I guess. US West Coast sounds like a nice place. But since then, obviously, much has happened. I also moved on from BMW first to Stanford University and then into consulting at McKinsey, and now with my own independent consulting firm, which is, I mean, back to when I was 10 years old, I'm still excited about mobility as such and what it actually is to get people to places and to make their lives more fulfilled, if that's not too philosophical. But still so many unanswered questions. And what I do today is basically look at, the ACES topics that people talk a lot about: autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. And I do much of this at the intersection of technology. After all, I'm still an engineer, and business as well, because after all, you need to turn things into dollars and make it somehow work. And it's pretty exciting. So,
hey Sven, I have to ask,
Sure.
do you miss driving on the Autobahn?
Yes. No, I will confess. I do miss that. However, there's this thing. So whenever I go to Germany, I'm like, well, I could take the train, because actually it's quite convenient to travel in Europe in general, but certainly in Germany as well. By train, one can actually read or relax or work while getting to my destination. But I'm like, well, maybe get a rental car. And then I'm stuck in traffic. I mean, there's no point. Because guess what? Whenever I want to get on the Autobahn, there's at least 10 other people who want to do the same thing. Well, it's obviously like a million of other people who are on the same stretch of road, it seems like. So, but I do miss that every once in a while. But also what I do miss is getting on a test track, actually. So that's... when sometimes people ask me, Sven, do you miss like working directly for a car company? And I say, well, I work for 5 different car companies at a time, because that's my client base. But really going to northern Sweden in like winter and do winter testing, or Death Valley and do summer and heat testing, or BMW has an amazing test track in south of France where you can do pretty amazing things with an automobile. So yeah, I missed that. Yeah.
Wow.
Have you
So
been to? Oh, sorry, what were you saying, Kai?
I was going to say, as it pertains to the question of autonomy,
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I mean, me coming at this much later than you, how have you seen kind of the goalposts move for this technology? Because I can only imagine that the seeds that are growing now were planted long ago, and over time the focus maybe was driver assistance, trying to make the car safer, trying to maybe make it a more enjoyable drive. Was there a kind of a shifting point in which it became apparent that the industry was moving towards full autonomy as opposed to just trying to have more intelligent driver enhanced systems?
Yeah. Well, it's too bad that I'm sitting here, but just around the corner, actually, there's this book that my parents got when I was just about 2 years old, around 1970, and it was about the future. And when I looked at this book when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 8 years old, and I saw this illustration in there which talked about the future, which was the year 2000, and it showed autonomous cars. And so it was great vision back then. And I looked at this, and then at some point it got all mixed up with me wanting to be an automotive engineer. And I was like, well, whatever, that future vision is probably, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But when I got like sort of professionally involved with autonomous vehicles, that was actually doing my master thesis, which back then actually was diploma thesis called in Germany. It was in 1994. I was doing that at Volkswagen in Wolfsburg, so the R&D headquarters. And I heard a lot about the Prometheus program, which was a European like driver assist, eventually self-driving car sort of program. And if you look this up, they had this thing where they did like 95% hands-off, feet-off driving for 1,200 kilometers at a time. I mean, they needed to refuel, but other than that, it was basically self-driving. And that was definitely something when I thought, oh, maybe that is not so much just a vision, it's maybe more. And then starting at BMW, just actually a year later, I got in touch very early on with the people who were working on what's called adaptive cruise control. So the system that actually keeps distance to the car in front of you and then basically sets your speed according to the distance. And that was also something when I figured, well, that's more than just helping the driver a little bit. That actually is taking over parts of the driving. And then certainly the thing that changed everything, and I'm not saying this because I'm a Stanford affiliate, when the DARPA Grand Challenge successfully completed in 2005. The first one was 2004, but nobody could actually do it, and it was 2005. And the DARPA Grand Challenge was this thing organized by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program Agency, to have vehicles drive by themselves in the Nevada desert, and that someone could do it. I think it was like 120 miles or something like that. And that was quite something. But since then, I will say that the goalposts, as you were asking, I think they moved back and forth quite a bit. If you look me up on the web, I mean, I've always been saying it probably takes longer than we expect, and it might be different than we will think. But so these are sort of the, let's say, the milestones that I definitely want to say. So like the first image that I saw in the whatever early 70s, and then this Prometheus program in the 90s, and DARPA Grand Challenge. So that's quite a bit.
Nice. Thank you for providing that history and context over there. It's exciting to
Just
see.
a brief history, okay?
No, it's great.
And much more.
It's amazing.
A
Nice.
brief history of autonomous driving by Sven Beiker. Yes. Sure.
That's
You
more
sent me
than
an
I know.
autograph.
So that's for sure. That was enlightening.
Yeah. So when it comes to, just, what does that future look like? How long it'll take to get to that point? When you're looking at kind of that roadmap, and when that will actually be having a fleet of robo-taxis, I think that's the bar, that's the economic bar, right? So when you're looking at when that will happen, plus the technologies and all the sensor suites, the LiDARs and sensors and everything surrounding it, is it just inevitable that by the time the robo-taxis are in a commercial deployment on a meaningful level, they will be electric cars? Do you agree with that, or you disagree?
No, I mostly agree, and for the following reason. And it's interesting how you phrase this question, Ronald. Like, by the time those vehicles will be economically viable, will they be electric? Which almost implies something. It might take some time, and maybe by then internal combustion engines are just a thing of the past. If that's the thing, I even more agree with it. Sometimes the question gets asked if an autonomous car should be or has to be electric as well. And I remember the first time I got asked that question, I want to say it was like 2012 or something, when we were doing a project for a large global OEM on autonomous driving, and they wanted a narrative like, well, autonomous cars got to be electric, right? And I said, well, I don't know. As an engineer, I mean, why? Because steering is basically electronically controlled. Brakes are electronically controlled, and powertrain, even if it's like a combustion engine, I mean, even if it's like a diesel engine, which is like the most mechanic you can think of, it's electronically controlled. So you don't need an electric powertrain to control it from whether it's artificial intelligence or whatever smart system. And since then, this question has come up quite a few times. And therefore, I say yes to robotaxi probably will be electric vehicles. For one, because as you hinted, I think, in laying out your question, because of the timelines. Robotaxi will still take some time, and obviously electric vehicles are increasingly gaining market share, maybe not as fast as many of us might hope, but definitely it's up and coming. So check, yes. But also, robotaxi, if you think about it, that's probably in the urban environment. And you see more and more cities actually, for all the right reasons, say, in my city, you better be electric, otherwise you don't get in. And so for regulatory aspects, that if you want to deploy in a certain city, you probably have to be electric, otherwise you don't get in. And one more aspect, if you also think about it, how these robotaxis actually drive. It's a lot of stop and go, relatively low speed, and smooth acceleration and braking. And that has just electric powertrain written all over it. I mean, that doesn't sound like a V12 engine with whatever 9-speed automatic double clutch transmission or something like that, right? So that's for the use case as well. So I think for the timeline, for regulatory aspects, and for the use case fit, probably it's going to be electric.
We're just getting knowledge bombs dropped on this podcast over here. That's a definitive yes.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be anything else.
It's a yes with a little bit of extra info, I guess, right? If you just want yes, no answers, sure, we can.
No, it's great. I love it.
5 minutes with a whole shebang.
And to that point, talking about the powertrain that they select in order to, power the autonomous fleet. What are your opinions on? It could be a matter of necessity, right? So you've got a player like Waymo, and they're outfitting. I think there's a combination of ICE vehicles as well as electric vehicles that they've targeted for their initial testing. But do you see the private industry potentially leveraging, because if we do have a battery metal shortage, we do have a supply chain crunch with the electric car battery manufacturing. Do you see autonomy coming close enough to potentially justify having ICE? Because it seems like some of these companies are really chomping at the bit to try to get something on the road as soon as humanly possible.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, again, I don't necessarily know of a technical reason why you would not want to have an internal combustion engine in an autonomous vehicle. And let's not forget, I mean, you asked about robotaxi, but let's talk about the other end of the spectrums, like heavy duty trucks on a highway, like long haul trucks, like 18-wheeler. They're not going to be electric anytime soon. So for sure they will have a combustion engine. And then once you have these goalposts or bookends of the spectrum, there's anything in between. And if you look that up on the web, sure, these companies are, I mean, like the Waymos of the world are happy to point out that they use at least hybrid vehicles, and that's environmentally conscious, and it is. But you will also find that I think Ford had something 2 years ago or something like that, when they said, well, the best autonomous car actually is not an electric or not a battery electric vehicle, it's a hybrid, because actually otherwise the autonomy eats up too much electric power and it drains the battery and all of that. And it's like, yeah, Ford, but come on, if you have an autonomy system that draws like 1 kilowatt of electric power, that's probably not a very efficient system. But still, as an R&D system, as a prototype system, I mean, that happens with the car companies all over the world. For the prototypes, they always have drained batteries, period. I mean, the 12 volt, like the low voltage battery, because it's prototype systems, and there's so many compute tasks going on that doesn't have to do too much with what the actual production system is going to be. So from that perspective, what an actual production system is going to be ultimately, I don't know if you really need that much electrical power. But Kyle, you pointed out if there's a shortage in batteries or something like that, and if you want to deploy autonomous vehicles anytime soon, and you might not get enough battery, rare earth materials, lithium or whatever, if that's the nature of your question, I don't know if autonomous vehicle fleets will add that much demand to, it's in that case, battery materials. If they were, the whole thing, somehow the whole story wouldn't actually hold together, because after all, we say, well, with this whole shared autonomy and everything, we're going to do with much fewer vehicles than we have today, right? Because they're utilized more and much better organized. So I don't know if there's anything like this. One needs to look at individual cases for sure, but I'm not concerned, no.
Sven, how about for the Suburban? Because I know a lot of our conversations around city, and in cities, robo taxis, electric vehicles, and all the use cases really jive and come together well. But once you move out of San Francisco and you go into more of the suburban areas, right, Walnut Creek and East Bay, or further out, how everything we talked about, does it still hold true? Because robo-taxi use cases there are not very compelling at all.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I would say the most advanced and maybe most used pilot program, and the one that's actually probably the closest to real deployment of a robo-taxi, is in a suburban area, because it's Chandler, Arizona, right? I mean, to my knowledge, I would actually need to double check that, to what extent actually non-company people can use Cruise, for instance, in San Francisco. I think you cannot, but I mean, you can download the Waymo app and get a ride in Chandler, Arizona. And maybe you can do Cruise in Scottsdale. I would need to double check that. But anyway, Chandler and Scottsdale probably qualify as suburban area, definitely compared to San Francisco. And so definitely suburbia lends itself better to the deployment of autonomous vehicles because the traffic setting is less complex. Roads tend to be more straight, wider, and less pedestrian and all of that. And often also, at least the ones that are being picked till now, relatively new suburban developments where you can say you have pretty good lane markings and you have some certain infrastructure. So all that works pretty well. So I think suburbia for sure is easier to cover with an autonomous drive system than, let's say, Union Square in San Francisco or Times Square in New York City.
But how about ownership, right? Like there, because when I think suburban, I think if I had to depend on robo-taxi in suburban, I can only imagine how difficult it would be to handle my own schedules. I have certain supermarkets I like to go to. My work isn't necessarily going to come off all at the same time. It's longer distances, longer waits, and all that stuff, right? Like
So that is very true, Kevin. I think to figure out the best use case, and best use case is where the system actually works, people want to use it, and you actually can make money off of it. That is, well, I guess the billion, if not trillion-dollar question. And that in general, I think.
I'm not gonna lie, Sven. I was hoping you just tell me the idea, and then all three of us can take away with it, right?
Well, we might want to do this off the record. Let's say we don't want to share with everyone. Okay.
Okay, that's fair.
Then just the five of us get rich. I think or the four of us actually. But really, what I mean by that is, I don't know if one can legitimately say, here's the application, the use case, the business case, where autonomy will actually save money in the short term. Because one project that I'm working on at the moment is actually teleoperation. So teleoperation, you're probably familiar with this. It's arranged if a human just monitors remotely via camera and stuff what the autonomous vehicle is doing, all the way to maybe remote driving in a certain situation. But guess what? You still have people in the loop. They're just not sitting in the car. And you maybe can come up with something, but one human operator can take care of 4 vehicles. But that means the cost of labor is not zero. And still the vehicle costs more. And maybe it's not 1-to-4 like person to vehicle ratio. Maybe in the beginning it's 1-to-1. So you don't save anything. Plus the vehicles are maybe a little bit slower, and maybe they get stuck every once in a while and people don't want to pay for it and all of that. So I think that in that case crossover point where an autonomous vehicle is actually cheaper to a human-driven vehicle, that I don't know if we are anyway close. And that means if launching in a suburban area, then it's mostly because it's easier. That's not saying that that's a better business case. And in particular, I can imagine in suburbia, you are going maybe longer distances, and maybe also it's a little bit less predictable because people tend to drive to many different places throughout the day. Whereas in the city, if I just think about San Francisco, let's say many people maybe want to go, I don't know, from the inner Sunset to the Caltrain station or something like that. That almost it becomes a bus route, right? And that is therefore different in the city than in suburbia. But I think all of these things need to be figured out. It comes back to one point, which is one needs to get started to show that the technology works, but to also learn what it means to operate that technology and what consumers are willing to accept. If I said earlier, those vehicles might be slower, if nothing else, because they actually obey to the speed limit. It might even go a little bit slower, just in case. And are consumers willing to accept this, or do they want an Uber driver who you can tell, you know what, I give you $20 if you get me to the airport by 4:30?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, the autonomous vehicle won't do that with me. I've done that with Uber.
I don't know. That's a cost plus model right there. You can just that's the upsell.
No, but that also tells us what mobility is. It's not just getting from A to B. It is like, hey, this piece of mobility is part of my whole trip, which is in an automobile, on an airplane, on a bus, and finally I'm going to see my loved ones, whatever. It's this concept that you cannot just describe with numbers and say, oh, we just do everything with some software and great sensors, and then that equation is solved. There's always an individual story behind a trip that you can take an average, like people travel 25 miles average a day, and they have 1.4 people average per vehicle, and they burn so much carbon dioxide, and whatever. But that's only an average. In the end, it's so many individual cases where all of us make our choice and say, maybe not today. But I really want to get my own drive, and actually it matters to me that I can touch a steering wheel and have fun.
Well, I mean, like when I talk about robo taxis and automated driving, I just think about my wife. She drives. We have tons of supermarkets around us, but she drives 45 minutes to go to one in San Jose. Because it's her most favorite. It sells all her most favorite food, and she drives those 45 minutes. And then, of course, when she gets back, she calls me ahead of time, and she's like, okay, you need to come down and bring the rolling cart with you, because she buys so much stuff. There was no way. And it's usually 2 trips back and forth. And I'm thinking, well, if you have a robo taxi, what are they going to do? Park in front for my wife to bring out 2 bags at a time? This is not happening. Not happening.
No, but look, and that's what mobility is in the end. So I assume, I don't know your wife yet. I might meet her at some point, but she probably has good reasons why she goes to the supermarket, because
she loves the food. There's no
and she enjoys it probably. And an automobile enables her to do this, and that is some sort of freedom. And very often when we say, oh, an automobile is freedom, we think about very masculine things like, hey, I get in my whatever super car and I just go at maximum speed and I have ultimate freedom or something like this. Sure, that's freedom for some people. For others, it's like to go to the yoga class somewhere in the boonies, and you can stay as long as you want because your car is parked outside and you get home whenever the class is over, and not when some sort of autonomous vehicle service is still operational. And that's what we need to understand, that what very often we just judge by the average numbers is such a spectrum of how we consume, use, and actually enjoy mobility. And I'm absolutely certain that robo-taxis and autonomous delivery vehicles and all of this stuff will be part of the mix. But I don't know if there's one single robo vehicle that can do it all.
Yeah, I was going to say that Kevin's illustration or example of his wife going to that particular grocery store, when you bring that question in front of an engineer, the engineer would say, well, with an autonomous fleet, we would have the autonomous vehicle go to that store locally, whichever one was coincidentally closest to the source, have the store load up the groceries that she purchased on her phone, and then drive it all the way out, and then you'd save all this time. But like you were saying, mobility is far more than just the metrics of how long
Mm-hmm.
it takes to get from point A to point B. Because if you'd ask my wife, she'd say the experience is going into the store. The experience is
There you
physically
go.
being there so
Exactly.
that I can look at what's on the shelf and I can make
Exactly.
decisions about things. I didn't even know this existed. I looked at the
Yeah.
can. I really like this thing.
Yes.
And I know the same would go for me, like, you know, being able to physically go to a place.
Yeah.
So because of that, and because there's so much more to solve for than just simply, you know, getting something from point A to point B, between that and the concept of sharing these vehicles and potentially moving away from single ownership of vehicles, are there particular challenges that you yourself or these OEMs are tracking from a cultural perspective, like a psychological perspective, where, you know, Americans are so individualistic, they want to own what they own. It's a status symbol, a source of pride. Whereas with Europeans, maybe there's more tolerance for sharing. Maybe there's just, it's a more cultural acceptance of things. Are there kind of decisions that are being made behind the scenes that are kind of like anticipating certain markets being more favorable for autonomy and sharing?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you asked in your question particularly about OEMs, and so let's talk about those car manufacturers maybe first, and there's certainly others of the spectrum, whether that's Uber and Lyfts and maybe Googles and Waymos and whatever. But car companies, to start off, for sure, I mean, they have pretty big marketing and strategic marketing groups that for decades have basically looked at how people purchase a car and what they are looking for. Everything from horsepower to the stitching of the leather seats or something like that. And they certainly do see differences in consumer preferences across regions, where, for instance, you see Americans are buying a car very often just what's on the dealer's lot and take it home the same day. Whereas in Europe, it's basically you customize the vehicle exactly to your liking. And then if it takes 3 months for you to take delivery, that's actually a very special thing because that is exactly your car. And there's certainly even more, I mean, how people take care of the car. I'm always amazed that in the US, it seems to be normal to have an oil change every 6,000 miles, so 10,000 kilometers, which is unthinkable in Europe. I mean, in Europe, you like 30,000 kilometers or more for an oil change. But there's like consumer, I don't know, understanding or just customs, like, well, that's what it is, and this is how we do it, and we've always been doing it like this, and it worked, and why would I change it? Never change a winning team. And now translating this into sharing and autonomy, certainly car companies do the same thing. The question, however, is, are they doing it well enough? And it's where the car companies are not doing a good enough job, I would say, like using actual consumer data from their mobility behavior. In other terms, how much do they really drive? Where do they go? What time of day and all of that. And this is where certainly companies like Uber know much more about consumer mobility profiles than a Toyota or Mercedes or what have you. And it's certainly a double-edged sword because it does become something where data privacy is a very important value, and car companies in general have earned the trust of the consumers, not all to the same level, and some in particular, maybe German company have lost some trust over the last 6 years. But still, it is different, let's say, a car company or a social media company, right? That lives off of knowing so much about their consumers, whereas a car company lives off of selling something more or less one time to a consumer. So the question actually becomes, if car companies were well enough positioned to use all that data, what could they do better? And that's really something where the car companies then get goosebumps, like, oh, using consumer data, do we really want to do this? So that's, I think, still an open question. But one can definitely do more. One can do more. If it's better for the companies, remains to be seen.
When it comes to consumer preference, that's something I'm really excited to see, and what that unlocks. Like we saw, the total addressable market for Uber just wasn't taxi driving, right? It opened up a whole new world where people didn't even own cars anymore because they just kept using Uber. And when you're looking at cost per mile going down to 25 cents or even lower in a robo-taxi world, what are some of the more interesting use cases that you or people in the industry that you've talked to have seen around how that could change the way we view mobility and having additional experiences that we normally could not afford or even, desire? Or what are some potential new experiences that you're excited for that you hope happens? Would love to hear your perspectives there.
Yeah. So no, it's definitely something. Let's say if today the cost per mile for you drive your own car, give or take, let's make this $1 a mile or something like that. And the numbers that are being tossed around, as you say, Ronald, is like 25 cents a mile. Some even say 18 cents a mile or whatever, but definitely significantly less. And I mean, it does enable many things where you can say you don't even think less about a trip, and can certainly have a very different setting of e-commerce and on-time delivery, and like you order something and it shows up at your doorstep within an hour and all of that, where Amazon one way or another offers today, but it might get even cheaper. You could go on a trip even more spontaneously and all of it. However, there are two caveats in that. Number one is think what you wish for, because if something gets ultimately convenient, ultimately cheap, and ubiquitously available, then hey, we end up with a lot of traffic, and traffic is already a problem today. We would actually encourage to basically falsify, if you will, what we've been talking about a lot, which is actually shared mobility. I mean, it's not shared mobility if it's that cheap. I don't want to be with anybody else in that car, and it's cheap enough. I don't need to wait for this other person to get in this car because I just pay my 25 cents a mile, and that's good. So think what you wish for. And the other thing also is, I mean, who said that mobility is too expensive? Is that really the problem we are solving? Granted, I guess all of us are probably relatively well off, and we need to keep in mind there are definitely many less fortunate people. And still, my observation is that many people, even if not that fortunate as we are, can afford mobility. So mobility is relatively affordable. And therefore, I'm not sure if that is the primary problem we should solve. Other than, if we're okay today with paying $1 a mile, and if the cost can go down to 20 or 25 cents a mile, that means that someone might be making a lot of money, because we might still be paying 80 cents a mile or 75. And we say, okay, that's great, pay less. Was not asking for it, but hey, I save money, I take it. And someone is still making 50 cents a mile or something like that, like profit. So on the cost side, I'm not sold really on the idea that that is going to solve the big problems that we have. I'm actually concerned that it might come with quite some backlash.
Would you think about it then from a real estate side? Right, because this is something that Ron and Kyle, we were all talking about. Because once you go to, let's say, let's go under the assumption that autonomous vehicles become the norm, and just as you said, we have to be careful what we wish for. But if autonomous vehicles become the norm, Sen, do you need all those parking lots? Do you need side street parking? Because when I think about San Francisco, and I'm thinking, right, oh, it's only 2-lane street, one going one way, one going the other. All of a sudden, you just double the capacity of that street because, well, maybe you need a zone for people to get on and drop off. But essentially, you've doubled the capacity of all transits with side street parking.
Well, let's see. I mean, definitely if you increase efficiency of the mobility/transportation sector, that means you bring up utilization. So today, and you probably know these numbers, like personally owned vehicles are parked, not moving, 94% of the time, right? Which is like what 23 hours a day the car is parked. And even for trucks have a utilization around 50%, which is much, much higher than a private passenger vehicle. But still 50%, still not a great business case. And whenever vehicles are parked, they need a parking spot, obviously. And if we bring up utilization, you need less parking. That's actually an equation that I would subscribe to, that you can solve like this and say, okay, if we solve that equation, that's fine. And you might know all these numbers. I mean, how many parking lots there are in the United States, many more than there are vehicles. They're just on the right spot or whatever. But what you bring up as a scenario, if we have all these autonomous vehicles, do we actually need that many parking spots? We will not need that many if we bring up utilization. However, some people also say, wait a minute, that vehicle is self-driving. So instead of parking it somewhere and pay for parking, I can just have it idle around the block, where we just said it costs maybe 25 cents a mile, and let it move at 10 miles per hour. That's just $2.50 an hour. But if a parking spot is $5 an hour, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to have it circle or orbit around a block. And that is a scenario. I think it's an, I don't know, philosophical discussion, but we need to have this discussion. If that happens, that's definitely not what we want. The empty vehicles are just circling the block and then clogging the streets and actually burning energy, even if it's electricity. I mean, it is like consuming energy. But the thinking is so important, because all of a sudden we see, if we change things in that equation, and this is now changing like a human driver to software, all of these other things might need to be considered. And that's, again, where I say mobility is a fascinating thing, because it touches so many aspects and disciplines. And we will still need parking lots, because these vehicles also need to get maintenance, and you need to design the system for peak hour demand, which probably is rush hour. If we ever get back to a scenario where that is like the crazy time, but for sure there will be peak time and low time, and therefore you will need parking spots.
Hopefully, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, when companies are solving for autonomy, the thing that I wonder about is solving for autonomy, especially with like the vision systems, is understanding the lane lines and the ways in which we lay out our cities, and how we train and expect human drivers to behave, and having an autonomous system, mimic and emulate that. Do you expect that in all likelihood we will continue to, maybe in just America specifically, design our cities, design our roadways, and maintain consistency up until the point where autonomous vehicles can emulate a human driver within the confines of those parameters. And then we'll start to improve upon the designs now that human drivers are not maybe as much in the mix. I mean, because I know that there's the amount of cars that we can fit on a highway is probably limited by the accuracy and precision of a human driver, right? So you set your lanes to have extra amount of space in order to accommodate the lack of attention and to increase safety. So I think about how long will it take before we start to realize the benefits from a design perspective of our cities and roadways? Obviously it's a chicken or the egg. You can't really do one without the other. But what are your thoughts down that rabbit hole?
I mean, you would probably need to figure out at what time will you have predominantly autonomous vehicles, and that answer is probably not universal across the entire country, or also not across one state, or maybe not even across one metro region. So what we said earlier in this conversation were maybe in certain downtown areas, you only get in if your vehicle is electric. You can also imagine that downtown area maybe is only at some point open to autonomous vehicles, or at least vehicles that have maybe some sort of what's called vehicle to infrastructure communication capability. So they are connected and share their location and maybe connect to a central traffic management system and all of that. So there you can then also imagine that maybe the road design and hopefully with that the entire city design changes and gives more space to pedestrian and bicyclists and people, as opposed to machines, whether these are old school machines or new school machines. And then you start to see actually in some locations. I mean, there are these cities built from scratch in the Middle East, for instance. Madras was one of these projects, I think like 5 or 10 years ago, where they said, well, we're going to design a completely new city and we want to keep autonomous vehicles in mind and electrification and high-speed trains and all of that. So you definitely see some pilot programs in that, and that's what the entire world needs to learn from. But I would not expect something like, let's say we put up cell towers, and right now we go from 4G to 5G, and then we will go to 6G. That similar to that somehow is a blanketed approach across the entire country. That something similar will happen for how we design roads, streets, cities, because I think it's a much more specific approach. Only in this part of the city we're going to have that transportation system, therefore we design it differently. The suburb, therefore, great point earlier, Kevin, might be different again. Hopefully it's a very bikeable place. I mean, I applaud those cities and suburbs that designed for biking. And I don't know if autonomy is the biggest driver in all of that. I think it's much more that city planners, politicians, and consumers actually realize a car or a city where less priority is given to automobiles and more priority is given to kids playing outside and people enjoying time outside. I think that's much more a driver.
Sven, I'm not gonna lie. If I had my option for autonomous driving, all I want is my rental car company to autonomously drive that car to my place, and then I get to drive it wherever I want. And then when I'm done with it, it will drive itself back. Because
Let me ask you this, Kevin. I mean, does it have to come to your place autonomously, or what if?
well, I don't care. I don't care how it comes.
You don't care, right?
I just don't want to go pick it up because picking it up is a pain.
It
And
is.
if you ever drive to the Hertz in San Francisco, I mean, honestly, like when I look at that wall of driving up, I swear half their car, if you look at the cars, half their cars, and then you look at the wall, you can really see the paint on that wall match for 50% of the cars. People are bad drivers. What can I say? I look at the cars and I always have to take a picture and say, look, hey, this wasn't me, right? Like this was already here and you see it right on that corner. But it'd be great if autonomous vehicles, they just drove straight down, or some guy drove it straight down to me.
Yeah.
My wife then gets to take over and drive it to her supermarket. She buys everything she wants, loads up the entire trunk. I get to keep the car for the 15 minutes it takes me to, take it out of the car, walk up to my apartment, drop it off, walk back down, because it's always multiple trips, and then bring it back. And then I'm like, okay, I'm done. You guys can figure out what to do with this thing. It's not useful to me anymore.
But hey, look, I mean, some of this exists, right? And the rental car companies definitely have thought about it, and maybe all of them might offer it. So I think I do know that Enterprise, maybe even Hertz, offers it or offered it at some point. And I think you can get a rental car through Lyft as well, I think. And they bring it to you.
They don't bring it to you. Lyft drives you to their rental car place.
Okay.
Hertz doesn't do it. Enterprise is expensive. Yeah, there's all these other factors that make it.
And that might be something. So the idea, excuse me, Kevin, the idea is not revolutionary.
It's not,
right? I mean, the idea probably exists for as long as they're rental cars, and maybe in the early days, maybe the rental car was brought to you. And then at some point, the rental car companies just figured, let them come to us. It is in the end a question of how much does it cost? And having a human drive that vehicle to you and getting the human back to the rental car station obviously costs quite some money. And what we said earlier, if we can take the human out of the equation and the trip only costs them 25 cents a mile, as opposed to if you have a professional driver, it's not $1 anymore, it's maybe $1.50 or something. And that's something where ultimately one might call it disruptive, but also like Uber as a basic idea, it's not such a disruptive idea. It's just a better organized taxi service, right? And it might be similar here with a rental car service, that someone maybe figures out how to do this. And I mean, Uber, as we all know, is not a profitable service at this point, but somehow subsidized with big venture capital investment. And maybe also for rental car service, that it's for Kevin, hey, you still get to drive yourself, but someone brings a different and very exciting car to you every day you need it, or your wife needs it. Hey, there's our business idea, and we're going to turn this into a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity. How about that?
Kyle, you're going to have to cut this portion
out.
You
got to edit this part out. This is a new business
idea.
And then, of course, Billy joins right when we're talking about a billion-dollar idea.
Yeah, we have a surprise guest here. Wow. Billy Riggs joining.
Hey, Sven Beiker, what's up?
Good to see you, Billy. Hey, haven't seen you in a long. That's great.
I know. We got to hang out on Cal Ave sometime. And
absolutely, we got to do that.
Yeah, I figure this is the clubhouse. These guys are amazing.
Seems like it, right? Yeah.
You're talking to one of the smartest guys I know. So,
come on. This is much better than Clubhouse because you actually see one another.
well, Billy,
don't put hate on Clubhouse.
If we keep this part in, we need you to introduce yourself, at least so people know who you are.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm the Zoom bomber tonight. This hat I'm wearing So I'm Billy Riggs, and so I'm a professor of management at University of San Francisco, transportation planner, engineer, and work with a lot of companies as a consultant. Some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't. But so I help out American Battery, which these guys love a lot, and with Sven and I have worked with a lot of some German companies in the past.
Yep.
And so we have a long history working together, and I think shared a keynote address for a Mayfest
That's right. Yes.
celebration about 4 years ago for the Bavarian Chamber, basically called Invest Bavaria. So, yeah, I'm happy to bomb this. I was Zoom hopping.
That's
and
a
I didn't
thing?
realize I was hopping into your room. I actually, my students have meetings, so I was actually going from student meeting to student meeting. And apparently, I just
This ended up on your calendar.
This
Really, that is
thing.
the dumbest excuse ever.
Yeah. Well, I kept
wow.
on getting calendar invites, and I was like, oh, okay, this has got to be the link. And then I realized that was, oh crap, that was Sven's email to Ronald. So at first it was innocent, and then I was just like, oh shit, I'm gonna log in and log out. But oh shoot, I probably can't curse on
No,
this
you can't.
either.
It's YouTube. Nobody cares. Yeah.
We need to put in the American battery disclaimer now because you brought up the word.
Yeah. Now we're investors and
Hey,
advisors.
so it's all right. You can edit it out. But yeah. So nice to see you guys. Sorry to interrupt. And Ronald, did you really go to Indiana University?
Yes, I'm a Hoosier. IU.
What the heck? Come on, I'm the only person in my family without an Indiana degree.
He thought he knew you,
Right.
clearly.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, whatever. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go watch
All
some
right.
Gene Hackman now. Okay, I'll let you guys finish. Sven, let's hang out soon, okay?
Absolutely, we will. Good to see you, Billy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
thanks for
okay.
making
Join
this
us,
connection
Billy.
in the first place. It's a good discussion.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, these guys actually are really fun and smart.
They are.
Fun to
Yes,
talk to. So,
absolutely.
all right, peace.
Thanks,
See you,
man.
Billy. So pretending like that never happened, because this may or may not make it into the final cut. So I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room that we haven't really talked about. So Tesla has a very distinct way in which they think that they're going to crack the nut of autonomy with the obviously mass producing the vehicles with the hardware that they believe will be sufficient to meet the need, and develop the software alongside of rolling those vehicles out with the massive amount of data that they are then collecting from that fleet. So is there a consideration in your mind, A, as to whether or not you think it'd be too soon to say if they will or won't be successful, but clearly they're making progress. Do you see any challenges? I mean, not any challenges. There are challenges. What are the challenges that you believe they're going to encounter? Much in the way that we were saying, mobility is more than just the sum of the car being able to navigate the road. Do you think they're going to maybe hit a wall somewhere with that platform in which they've reached a point that they cannot simply train a computer model to do something better?
Yeah, let's see. So for sure, Tesla is a very interesting case to look at, and at the outset, I do want to say they've accomplished a lot and really changed the thinking in the industry. And this is not a statement that has a but in it, and then I negate everything that I just said until then. I rather want to extend this and also say that the approach that Tesla is following is different than what Waymo is doing or Cruise or companies like that, and actually more similar to what the traditional car companies are doing as well, whether that's a Daimler or Audi or Cadillac or Toyota or what have you, which is a more evolutionary approach, probably where Tesla is taking faster and longer steps than the traditional car companies. And the challenges or the risk and problems that we see obviously come in a way that people overtrust the system or actually take the labeling on that system very literally, like autopilot. And that for sure is a challenge, and that can be a discussion for a podcast in itself. But my main concern for Tesla in regards of their approach towards autonomy is that they might hit the wall, as you put it, Kyle. That is that the customers, and especially the Tesla aficionados are losing patience and trust in what Tesla is doing. That Tesla might be overstretching things, or that it comes out that some things were maybe well meant, but ultimately overpromising. Full self-driving, level 5, these sort of things, and that customers will say, well, now it's whatever, year 2023 or what have you, and I still need to touch the steering wheel every 45 seconds for all the right reasons, by the way. And that consumers might say, really? And you want me to pay, what, 10 grand extra for that? And for sure, they've had an amazing learning curve and progress in the feature capabilities. But I think it's going to get saturated relatively soon, if it's not already saturating right now. And that is my concern, that the momentum that Tesla has built, that that is going to slow down, and that consumers will say, you know what, great promises, but never happened.
So you're saying that the risk could be that they're a victim of their own expectations that they've set with the industry or with consumers, and that you're basically poisoning the well for everyone else if you fail to deliver something that meets the expectations, the lofty expectations that you've set. You know, coming out of the gates and saying autopilot, coming out of the gates and saying full self-driving.
Yeah. Almost all of what you just said, yes, except poisoning the well for everybody else. I can see that for everybody else, actually, there's a little bit of an upside, where right now, or let's say until half a year ago. So in the last couple of months, we've seen pretty intensive discussions around Tesla Autopilot, including federal regulators, for all the right reasons, by the way. But let's say half a year ago, that maybe we had the most perceived gap in between Tesla and other like top manufacturers, like, well, Tesla's here and everybody else is just trying to get in there, and that Tesla's coming down, and others are being perceived where they actually are. I mean, Cadillac Super Cruise actually is a noteworthy system, and I'm saying this, I'm not necessarily the greatest fan of Cadillac as a brand, but the Super Cruise is a pretty good system. And certainly, being a German automotive engineer, I find what the German manufacturers are offering as advanced driver assistance systems is not completely different from what Tesla's offering, but it definitely has more conservative setting, again, I think for all the right reasons. And maybe that is coming closer together. So in that sense, the concern is that Tesla might be falling victim to their own promises. But I'm not sure if it's poisoning the well for everybody else. In particular for Tesla, definitely running a very high risk that making a lot of promises and then not delivering it. It's a tough one.
I'll say a couple things over here as a shareholder since 2013.
Mhm.
That I have.
You're rich, man. You're rich.
I have 3,000 shares, so I hope they succeed. With that said, I recognize that if I don't think anyone gets level 5. I don't think level 5 is realistic. I think level 4 is the best you could hope for. I'm personally a level 3 driver. So when it comes to
You shouldn't, but okay.
When it
There's
comes
no
to
level 3 system on the market, but okay.
when it comes to Tesla sensor suite, I am personally afraid that a lot of their side cameras are too low, and then so it can be obstructed by occlusions too easily. When I look at those things, I meticulously watch every FSD video from Chuck Cook. I think he's the best barometer for how FSD beta is doing, and we'll see how it turns out. And I am deathly afraid if they actually can't get it, that what the retrofit costs are including cameras that are higher up in the car that might really blow up the economics of the company, right? But with that said, I appreciate that there's a diversity of approaches when it comes to self-driving, and that everyone's not just following one pathway, because I think we do need it, whoever comes out with it, and it's a good for society that we have it. Now, to your point, maybe who benefits in the society? Maybe it's Amazon with cheaper 1 hour deliveries, in which case I hope it's like Asia, where the driverless vehicles are on the sidewalks and everything, delivering your groceries, and it's not creating that traffic mess. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm not sure if you have any reactions to anything that I just said.
Well, for sure, what you said, you're not going to talk about level 5 because not realistic, and absolutely amen to that. So in my mind, level 5 is the same as infinity in math. So it's a very important concept to prove your theory, but you never get there. You get infinitely close, but it's still infinity. You never get there, right? But you need infinity as a concept in order to again prove the entire chain that it holds true. And I think that's the same with level 5 for the spectrum, or it's actually not a continuous spectrum. It's obviously the steps of levels of automation. I think therefore level 5 is important to actually say what you exactly just said. You never get to level 5, period, because level 5 means you can get in a vehicle here and drive all the way to the southern tip of Latin America without ever touching the steering wheel. That's level 5, and I mean, in theory, even beyond. But an autonomous vehicle doesn't drive over water. But that's, I mean, at least last time I checked. And that's something what level 5 by definition actually means. I mean, everywhere. And sure, I mean, be realistic, there probably should be a road, but still any kind of road, or a road with certain infrastructure. Well, if it's a road with certain infrastructure, that makes it level 4 because it's a specific ODD. So that all makes sense. With Tesla specifically, I don't know if there's something like where the cameras are mounted and all of that. I do know that very, very smart people at Tesla are working on autopilot. And as always in engineering, you need to strike a balance and find a compromise between what is maybe the optimal position for a sensor and what the designers tell you looks great, right? Because again, it's not just solving an equation for one thing. After all, what I said earlier, the stitching of the leather seats matters. And therefore, it's, oh, you want to put a camera there? That doesn't look good. Put it somewhere else. And that's what you find there. But more specifically to sensors, I do not agree, for instance, with Elon Musk when he says LiDAR is a fool's errand. So Elon Musk, well, actually, Elon Musk did say he doesn't have anything against LiDAR. He actually appreciates them a lot for his spaceships, but not in a vehicle, in a road vehicle. And I do follow his reasoning, but I still think if you want to get to something that does level 4 driving on highways and city streets and all of that, I think you better have a LiDAR in there. So that's, again, to Kyle's point, I can't imagine that autopilot as what it is today might actually hit a wall and not get much further. And I would absolutely seriously urge any car company on the planet really think very, very carefully if you officially want to offer a level 3 system. Because that actually means that somewhere in your owner's manual, you have something, you can do whatever you want. We call you when we need you. And I cannot see that any corporate lawyer actually lets you put that into a manual. And I can imagine that for Tesla Autopilot, we've seen maybe the steepest part of the performance curve over the last couple of years. it's still going to improve. And I will say what is amazing about Tesla in that regard, what no other car company does, that they use actually all the data from the vehicles in the field to make the system better. And whatever they are doing with this, what is it, Dojo thingy for even better machine learning. I mean, that is amazing. And that really pushes the envelope. But I mean, we're dealing with infinity here. You never really get there. You get closer, but you never get there.
I think, thank you for that. I think one good thing to end off the podcast on is when you're in this podcast, all of us care about sustainability and reducing emissions. It's a key tenet of what we're all here for in this future we want to go towards. When it comes to emissions reductions, whether it's in lower amount of vehicles on the road, lower personal transportation, electrification of cars, because self-driving, it's naturally better if they're electric cars. You know, when you think a lot of people talk about and espouse the environmental benefits of that, right? On one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people saying that's overrated. We have a lot more emissions from like animals and farming than we do cars. So it's like a PR stunt by these like auto companies to talk about that. Or, you know, like maybe it doesn't really reduce the amount of like, you know, transport emissions from transportation. It just reallocates who economically benefits from a robotaxi world, right? Where do you stand on that spectrum in terms of like what is the actual carbon impact or environmental impact from a robotaxi world or a self-driving world, and however you interpret it? And is it meaningful one way or the other?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, the impact of personal mobility on the global climate is well documented, right? I mean, that's like, what is it? 2/3 of the global petroleum production goes into transportation, and 1/2 of that into personal vehicles or something like this. So don't quote me exactly by these numbers, but it's immense what goes into transportation, and largely light duty vehicles that we drive around all day. And sure, and that's until now mostly internal combustion engines. But even if it's electric vehicles, that's not free energy. That's got to come from somewhere. And if you need to put together a 100 kilowatt hour battery, that in the manufacturing part and at some point maybe recycling part is pretty energy intense. So there's nothing that comes for free in this. And I do believe those scientists who compare the different industries, like there's transportation and there's manufacturing and there's agriculture, as you pointed out, and then there's private residences, heating and cooking and all of that. And again, you always find that transportation is about the largest factor of that. And we can drive down that impact by electrification. I believe that, especially if it's a reasonably sized electric vehicle, and that might not be necessarily a 100 kilowatt hour battery in every vehicle just to get the groceries from that great supermarket that Kevin keeps talking about. You probably can do this with a 10 kilowatt hour battery or something like that. Now, with robotaxi, what I said earlier, my concern really is if we make mobility ultimately cheap, ultimately safe, ubiquitously available, and ultimately convenient, I'm really not able to think that we will use it less. We will use it more. And that's also what you guys were asking about. What are all the other use cases and businesses that we can envision if it gets that cheap? So I think this is where we need to face reality. What we are about to do here might generate more traffic and therefore actually can also increase ultimately carbon emissions, unless we get to a 100% renewable energy faster than we get to this potential explosion of vehicle miles traveled. So I am concerned actually about this. There's a little bit too much pie in the sky, like rosy, everything's going to be fine thinking. It's some of it I actually find naive.
Well, I guess at least for the traffic problems, I think is means we just have to go to flying cars, Sam. There's no other way around.
Or tunnels.
I don't know, Kevin, if you even need energy in order to keep the vehicle
Afloat,
in air.
Yeah.
I don't know if that actually solves the energy problem. Granted, you might be able to get there faster and you're not stuck in traffic, but
we're gonna let Kevin
buying
beta test those.
Flying V. What's that?
I said we'll let Kevin beta test the flying cars. He can be the
so
first.
So we have not touched on these flying taxis or VTOL or whatever you want to call them. That is yet another concern of mine. It's a great visionary concept, but it might come with a lot of side effects as well.
Yeah, that one. I think that one. No one knows the consequences yet.
That noise pollution. Anyone? I don't.
And a crash just randomly falling in the middle of an intersection, just blowing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if consumer drones are anything to go by as far as the RPM of the fan blades and how fast those motors have to spin, those cars will be so loud. You would not want them anywhere. They'd have to be so high altitude to not introduce that much noise pollution. The environmental impact to birds and everything else from just a noise standpoint would probably make them a challenge.
Which tells us an automobile is a pretty cool thing.
It is. It is.
But it's got to be optimized much more. Yeah.
Well, looking forward to that future, and thank you for giving us a glimpse into it.
Yeah, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Good
Thanks,
discussion.
Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.